Hello, everyone. Hello. Um, Good to see you all again. Just getting started here in this new year. This is our second week, and that means Parshat Noach, the story of Noah. These first 2 weeks of the Torah readings are mythic in a different way than the rest of the Torah appears. Once we start with Abraham's story next week, we have some sense of a kind of proto-history. Like, it's not a history book, but it's meaning to tell the actual tale of our people in some kind of timeline. The stories of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Noah, they exist in a sense before time. Right? The world is then destroyed and we start all over again. So it's very rich material for that reason. That sort of mythic, like, what exactly does this mean? Why exactly is this here? I was teaching a group earlier this week, and someone asked, what is Noah even doing here? Why do we have this story? And that's a really good question. That's a really, really good question. That's in some ways the question. Why Noah? Adam and Eve, I almost feel like, well, I mean, beginning, I don't know, the start of humanity, but there's something about the Noah story that feels extra. Like, why did we have to learn about not just the destruction of humanity, but the one guy that survived and his story and the ark. And I have to tell you that the class that I wanted to do this week, the class that I had in mind this week, was mostly about the ark. I'm not going to do that class, so don't get excited. But I am still feeling such heaviness and such pain and such calamity in the world that I thought, oh, I want to go inside the ark. I want the shelter of the ark, but I also want to consider, and I thought to do this, maybe we'd look at some of the midrashim, some of the stories of what it was like in the ark. Because it was, as the rabbis imagine it, it was not a peaceful shelter. It was a shelter, but it was not a peaceful shelter. They say there were 3 levels of the ark, and they say one full level of the ark was just filled with crap, literal crap, like humans, animals, refuse. And then they worried about it stinking up. It's just like that sort of imagery, actual, actual refuse. I'm trying to be polite here. There's another story about Noah that says that he never got any sleep the whole time. 40 days, he never got any sleep. And he was always on a different schedule feeding the different animals. And he had to run around and keep all the animals fed. And then it says that one day he went into the lion's cage. Went into the lion's cage, and the lion mauled him so that he was injured forever afterwards. One midrash says that he was coughing up blood when he left the ark. I mean, really, harrowing imagery. And that felt appropriate to this moment, I have to say. All of that felt very that's where I wanted to go. So why am I telling you all of this? Because I had it in mind, but in the end, I felt like there's no real class there. We just look at one horrible image after another of, as the rabbis imagine it, what it was like on the ark. And that's worthy of some reflection, but there's not a lot of discussion there. I just show you another one and another one. So anyway, that's all by way of introducing Noah and the terrible destruction that he lived through, and the question of why we are reading his story at all. And one way that I think it is helpful to ask that question, and the class that we actually are going to have today is to ask about the covenant of Noah, because Noah receives a covenant, the first covenant. Covenant is like Brit. That's like top 10 words in Judaism, right? Like that's big, massive, the covenant. And we associate it with Abraham. Abraham is the one that received the covenant, the one that we inherit. But Abraham's not the first to get a covenant. And in fact, the guy right before him got a covenant. And so that's what we're going to do today, is try to like think about what is the difference between those two covenants and what is the nature of Noah's covenant. Maybe that'll help us understand what Noah's doing there altogether. Now, we're going to head in, but let me just give you, wanted to share with you something that is happening in this sort of related to this class this year, which is that I said this last week, but I'm writing a weekly Devar Torah essay on the Parsha for Hadar, for the Hadar Institute. And this is this week's, which you're welcome to read. The class will not just review the same material, but I do imagine that the class will often be related. Like I've been thinking about this material all week, and so, or actually last week, and so there are threads that are unraveled that need attending to. And it's true. If you read this essay, one of the things that I do touch on is the covenant that Noah gets. So there's a little bit of a teaser there, but we're going to go much deeper into that particular. So that's the way I hope it'll work, is that you'll be able to read one essay if you are interested, and then if you come to class, there'll be a deeper dive potentially into one of those footnotes. Here's the sign up for that, by the way, if you're interested in that weekly Devar Torah. Okay, and then the last thing that I want to do is just to say that Vera and I and Ben Cooley all work together to turn this class into a podcast, which it is, and it is available in an edited version. And then also we have on that podcast called Best Book Ever, we sometimes have special guests, and we just recently not only released last week's class, but also had a conversation that was sort of in the vaults with a musician and deep thinker in Torah, Ezra Furman. And so you can find, here is the podcast where you can find both our classes if you miss one, but also in this case, take a look at the conversation that I had with Ezra on the topic of descent in the book of Numbers. So these conversations are more like, not following the weekly Parsha, but just looking at themes in the Torah. And anyway, all right, that's enough of introduction. Let's say a blessing and get into it. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, good to be immersed in words of Torah, even as the world is unraveling. Okay, here's what I want to look at today. Is the covenant of Noah, and that covenant, as I just said, is the first brit to appear in the Torah, and it's rather surprising, even in not just because we're so used to talking about Abraham's covenant. Oh, reminder, Noah had a covenant as well. But even the way that it's first mentioned, I think leaves us wondering a little bit, what is going on here? So one question that I could start with is, what is a covenant? What is a covenant? But we'll get into that. We'll do that as we go. Let's just start looking at the material and take a look at the first covenant. Here's a source sheet for you all. Is that a link? Yeah, I don't know why it's bolded, but it bolded. Okay, there's a source sheet. Now let's take a look. God announces to Noah that that the world is to be destroyed, and here we go. ואני, הנני מביא את המבול מים על הארץ, לשחט כל בשר אשר ברוח חיים. Terrible announcement here. Behold, I am about to bring the flood, mayim al haaretz, waters on the earth. Lishachet, this is a word we see a lot in the story of Noah. Lishachet, to destroy. Really, really terrible language. Lishachet, to destroy all flesh under the sky or under the heavens in which there is the breath of life. I'm going to kill everything living, or every breathing thing. Okay, that's just like, that's enough to set you reeling. That's the story. But then we get this covenant. V'hakimoti et briti itach, but I will establish my covenant with you. Uvata el hateva, ata uvanecha v'ishtecha u'neshe vanecha itach. Okay, I'm going to establish my covenant with you, and you will go in the ark. So, like, with no other information, like, imagine that you aren't in a covenantal tradition, which we are. So it's like the word echoes so loud for us. But here, in this moment, when God says, Adam and Eve, and then, like generations, 10 generations go, move down the line, and then all of a sudden God is mad, God is done, God is going to destroy the earth. And we know that God is going to save Noah. We know the story is classic. God is going to save Noah. Noah's going to save the animals. They'll restart humanity. Noah is the only righteous person among the whole generation. Wow. But why a covenant? We don't get much more explanation here, although we will at the end of the story. But here, just in this one little mention, first mention of a covenant in the Torah, any sense of what God would be saying? What does it mean for God to say, as you go into the ark, I'm establishing a covenant with you? What do you expect from that? What do you expect God is saying here? Does anyone want to try to speak that out? Nature of this covenant? Let's just sit with that question for a second. Okay, Payam's going to give it a shot.
I mean, covenant's very weird because in essence, God doesn't need a covenant, right? He can do whatever he wants and it's not asking for anything from us. But I think what's interesting and what covenant creates is a first beginning of creating equality in some sense between us and God. It's the changing of the relationship between I'm this omnipotent being that can do anything to you. And then it's into God saying, okay, I'm going to give you instructions, or I'm going to tell you what I'm doing. So entering like certainty into it and seeing the human being as more of an equal partner in the relationship.
Great. Okay. Beautiful. So Payam is now doing some of that work that I said we would do along the way. Just think about, well, it's okay. So what is a covenant? What is a covenant? Well, it's a promise, but it's not just a promise. There's a mutuality to it. It is some kind of exchange of promises so that both parties are beholden to one another. And Payam says that's weird. That's weird because what does God need? I need to promise you that I will what? And I need from you your promise that you will what? What does God need from all of this? But that's in some ways the radical nature of the covenant in our tradition, which is there is some sense that no, God is beholden to us as well. And there is not just a mutuality, but as Payam puts it, almost an equality or a presumed equality. Obviously, nobody's equal to God, but there's some sort in the covenant, God kind of comes down to be like a partner in an arrangement. Okay. So that's helpful. Now, so we can talk about how that plays out in our tradition, but what is the arrangement that God will have with Noah? So that's, I just am taking Payam's helpful framing and then trying to use it to ask the question. Well, we know what God is going to do for Noah, or, I guess, God is going to save Noah. And then what? I mean, this is almost unfair because it's just a mention, and we are definitely not going to be, soon we will see how God speaks out the covenant with Noah. We'll have more information. But yeah, there seems like there's some kind, it's not just, I hereby, I'm going to save you, I promise. But no, I have a covenant with you, which means I'm going to enter into a relationship with you. And what is the relationship God is going to enter into Noah? Especially because, to return to my first point, does God establish that much of a relationship with Noah? Noah's gone after this week, right? So what's going on here? Okay, let's take just a couple more answers. One from Robert. Robert
I
Hammond.
agree that there's a deal here to be made, but I don't agree that it's one of equality, because when you look at other kinds of treaties from that era, it was usually between a ruler and his subservient people, and that's usually the way that these covenants that God makes with the Israelites work out later on. You do X, Y, and Z, and I will provide an overarching protection to you. I, from my high station, will provide you, my serfs, with a certain amount of protection as long as you do all of the things I want you to do.
Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you, Robert. Another very helpful way of framing the covenant. And Robert starts with the point that it need not be an equal partnership. There is simply some contract, a social contract, if you will, but a contract made in the ancient world between maybe a ruler of great power and the people who submit to the ruler. To submit to the ruler, and in exchange will receive, for their loyalty, will receive benefits. That's another way to think about it. And says Robert, we might well think of our own covenant with God that way. We're not equal to God, but we're loyal to God, and we will do God's will, and for that we will have benefit. Now, that again raises the question, okay, so what about Noah? Because Noah then might be seen to be entering into a unique relationship with God, where Noah becomes God's subject and representative on earth. Noah, it sounds like Noah will be the sacred nation. That when we think about our own covenant, we know how to conceive of these terms of our king and we are the people, and all those metaphors. So I guess that's what's happening to Noah. That seems like that's what's happening to Noah, and yet it does not. At least, if it does, it seems like superseded or left behind by Abraham's covenant. Okay, let's take one more pass at this from Hal, and then we'll move forward to actually take a look at. As I said, I'm being a little unfair because in one mention, I'm just asking you to speculate. But that's the point: is that here's the first mention of covenant in the Torah, and there isn't any explanation of it for at least chapters to come. But let's take Hal's thoughts first.
So what occurs to me is using the term covenant as opposed to what's been mentioned, a deal or maybe a contract, suggests that this is ongoing, that this will last longer than Noah. Now, obviously, it's not tied to a particular people in that sense, but I'm of the belief that this gets written in after the other facts have already occurred. And so I think it's just trying to create a sort of resonance with the covenants that come later, at Sinai or with Abraham and at Sinai. So I just think this, that it exists in perpetuity, I suppose, is the implication I would draw from covenant.
Okay. Two really, really useful comments from Hal. Two really excellent points. One is that here's another feature of covenant, is that it endures. There's some enduring relationship to covenant, and that is why I think I was thinking as Hal was putting it that way. That is why we often find reference to God remembering the covenant God remembered the covenant. And God says that to Moses when God, in the beginning of Exodus, says, I remember the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's why I'm here. So there's some enduring. And in fact, that language of remembering the covenant we don't have remembering the covenant in this Parsha, but we do have God remembered Noah and then ended the flood. That's the beginning of chapter 8. So this idea that a covenant will span, in this case, just over 40 days, but still, it's not just a momentary exchange, but something that will endure. That's an important, and how does Noah's covenant endure is a question that we could ask. And then I think I heard Hal also wondering and suggesting at the end how we think about Noah's covenant, the enduring covenant of Noah, in not just contrast, as I've been doing so far, but also in some kind of relationship to the covenant of Abraham. And maybe the Torah seems to want both of these covenants to be operative, right? We're asking this question, why Noah? Well, one of the questions is we get a different covenant, maybe to start to maybe suggest, although I don't want to conclude here, but maybe there's a covenant with humanity and then a covenant with the people of Israel. Maybe there's some that's the way we're stacking it, but I don't want to, that's already giving it too much framework. Let's take a look at Noah's covenant. Okay, let's take a look at the way it appears now after the flood. So you go on to the flood, all the terror of the world's destruction, and then they come out of the flood. Now, when they come out of the flood, Noah makes an offering to God. That's worth mentioning. So there's some kind of religious relationship there. And the other thing that's worth mentioning, I want to mention this because it's important, but I also want to say I am not 100% committed to incorporating this into the covenant, but it bears mentioning that God gives Noah a series of laws. Not many, just famously they become understood as 7 laws that Noah gets. But there's some kind of the first legal code that is given to Noah. And I have to mention it because it comes right before the covenant is established. I'm not sure if the laws are the covenant or not. Okay, so I'm not deciding that yet, but let's take a look. Now we're after the flood, right? Chapter 6 before the flood, chapter 9 after the flood, and they come out and God bless Noah and his sons and say with Genesis-like language, pru, be fertile and increase, be fruitful and multiply. I'm giving you all the creatures, and you can, this is the end of vegetarianism. You can eat animals now. Okay, but here are some of the laws. You must not eat flesh with lifeblood in it. In other words, you can't eat a living thing. Ever min achai. And as for your own lifeblood, I will seek justice. I will require a reckoning. And this is the famous line: Shofech dam ha'adam b'adam, damo yishafech. Whoever sheds human blood, by human hands that one's blood shall be shed. That's not really, that's a translation. So how we translate that is a question. For in the image of God was humankind made. So I don't want to get too deep into this, but you can see there are some laws. Don't kill each other, right? In some at least basic way. Okay, don't be savage. Maybe that's the not eating living animals, things like that. Okay, then there's a break. This little symbol tells you there's a break in the Torah, and then we get, this is the covenant of Noah. All right, so let's see the covenant of Noah, and now we'll try to understand. Okay, God said God was going to make a covenant. Here it seems it is, and now God establishes it. So it hadn't been established before. Okay. It hadn't been established before. God said God would make a covenant, but here it is. God said to Noah and to his sons with him, Vani hineni mekim et briti tichem. I now establish my covenant with you all, and with your offspring to come, and with every living thing that is with you. Did you hear that? Ve'et kol nefesh hachaya asher itchem. Meaning birds, cattle, and every wild beast as well. All things that had come on the ark, every living thing on earth. That's That's it. Just take that in. I now establish my covenant with you all of you. I will maintain my covenant with you. Vakimoti et briti tchem. I never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood. And never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. That's good news. Okay. Is that it? Was that the covenant? Is that the agreement? What before it was just you'll be saved in the ark. Now never again will there be a flood. Okay. And this is important for us as well. We're going to have to think about this as we move forward in this conversation. There isn't just the covenant, there's the sign of the covenant. Vayomer Elohim zot ot habrit asher ani noten beini uvenechem uvein kol nefesh chaya asher itchem lo dorot olam. This is the sign. This is the sign that I see for the covenant between you and every living creature with you for all ages to come. This is the sign. I have set my bow in the cloud. You know what sign? Do you know the sign? The sign is the rainbow. I have set my et kashtina tati ba'anan. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow appears in the clouds. It says bow here because the thing for Kasher, as the rainbow. Same reason we call it a rainbow in English. Here we go, remembering the covenant. I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature among all flesh, so that the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the, a little repetitive here, when the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant. And that's another kind of like the Al's point. Brit Olam, it lasts forever. That's significant. Noah and Noah's story may be eclipsed, but his covenant lasts forever. Okay. That, God said to Noah, shall be the sign of the covenant that I've established between me and all flesh that is on earth. Okay, so there we have it. Now, there's a number of questions here, but first, I think I want to ask, what is the covenant? We have more information now, and what's the agreement? What has been agreed on Noah's end, on God's end? What is the nature of this covenant? Okay. I am happy this week to call on the Parsha's namesake, Noah Pollack.
Thank you, Rabbi. And a few things that are just floating around in my head. That we're getting that Reish other letter. In Bereshit we got that Reish Aleph. Here we're getting Briti, the that Reish Yud, Taf Yud. That there's the Yud of the hand, the divine Yud. So I'm thinking that regardless of how we interpret both the creation and divine are within it, and I'm thinking the creation of this covenant is the first of many, many steps to get us to where we are today, and letting us know that the divine one's always there. And
okay,
and I'll stop there.
What Noah says is exactly what Nachmanides says, the Ramban, which is that there is some relationship between the language of Brit and Bria, of covenant and creation. And just to, tease out Noah's thoughts a little further, that means every covenant is a kind of a new creation. Bereshit, like, and Noah's doing some of the beautiful kind of almost like Kabbalistic work of like Bereshit, right, has in it the literally the word of covenant, and the Kabbalists say, those who play with the letters to find secrets, would say that actually it's Bereshit is Brit Eish, a covenant in fire. That if you take all like the letters of Bereshit, you have Brit Eish, right? That's cool, right? That's cool. So, but that means just on a more semantic level, that's the beginning of the world. Noah's covenant is the beginning of something new, which is at least a a kind of a peace, a truce between God and the world. I will not destroy the world for your destruction. We should just articulate that a little bit further. The idea seems to be before the flood that when people screw up, God will just smash them, right? You're out of the garden, your building's being destroyed, Tower of Babel's after, actually. You're out of the garden, you're doomed to wander, your whole world is going to be destroyed. Okay, so this then is like an agreement that even though I know humanity cannot always behave up to the standard that I've imagined, nevertheless, I will not destroy them. Okay, so that's a new creation, and the creation of a new norm, and so it is with Abraham, a new creation. I think Noah suggested maybe there are new beginnings. Every covenant represents a new beginning throughout history, right? And Sinai is a new covenant, and I'm sure Christians would finish the sentence differently than I would, but whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like covenants all the way down, as you might say. Okay, I'm getting into strange waters here. Okay, Matt, let's hear from Matt Silberstein.
Yeah, a covenant. I'm the part we didn't mention about the first thing there is that God says, go do this and go do that and go do this other stuff. And we had in the beginning, God said, and the world was. God spoke and the world is created. Now we have, God is saying, people act. Noah, I want you to do something. And I think that's an essential piece of what is going on here. Because we also have a rule for Adam and Eve. Hey, you can go do these things now. And it's a food rule because food rules become important. But we're bringing in, what I think is important here is we're bringing in human action. And this is slightly off, but what you start to say is, why do we have Noah? The Babylonian stories say people were noisy and the gods didn't like that and wanted to get rid of them. And we're saying, no, people matter. Morality matters. What people do matters like that. So people have to act in ways, and God is going to do. So it's not just God's promise, because a contract isn't just a promise. I will do this for you. You give me $1. Now we have a contract.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a very that's a very important framing that incorporates these. I was not sure, do we incorporate them or not? But Matt is clearly incorporating some of these mandates, these laws, these commandments that come right before the covenant, that our tradition records as universal laws, right? Like from these verses, the rabbis understand 7 basic laws that include setting up court systems, some that include, basic standards of morality and justice. And that is maybe the most, we can talk about the kind of the literary echoes of these two covenants, but the most straightforward way to think about just like the system, to think sort of clearly and rationally about the systems that are being offered here, I think Matt is doing, which is to say, first, there is all covenants involve an exchange. You are willing to do this, and and I am willing to do this for you. And God is saying, what I'm willing to do for you is not to destroy the world. What you need to be willing to do for me is to behave along a certain standard of basic decent. I need just this much from you, okay? And when people don't behave in least that decent standard, maybe God will destroy again, not the whole world, but Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And then when Abraham comes along, and then when Moses comes along, it becomes more. I expect more from you in order to have like a new kind of relationship. But you'll have to do more laws, right? We have 613 laws, but here are 7 basic ones, and it is important, as Matt frames it, to have that exchange of duties in a contract, in a covenant. So the laws here are important. All right, let's hear from Ariella and then Richard, and then we'll go back into the text.
What strikes me is the rainbow, that it isn't just a transaction between me and you, but there is a sign that people are ever present to the contract. It's top of mind. When people see that rainbow, they're reminded of God's promise.
Good. Thanks for taking us there, Ariella, because that's important too. As I said, it's not just a covenant, but it's a sign of the covenant. As Abraham will have a covenant and a sign of the covenant. The covenant in this case is the rainbow. I don't know about you, but I think about Noah every time I see a rainbow, right? You read the Torah enough and like, that's what a rainbow is. And it's a beautiful thing. It's always a beautiful thing, but it's always like, there's a reason it's picked, right? It comes after rain, right? And so we are reminded of this peace that God is granting the earth. And the question, of course, that, for our purposes of our conversation is why, that's beautiful. Why do we need a sign of the covenant? I mean, maybe we won't answer that question. Maybe we'll just say, well, just note that's one of the features of a covenant, is that there's always a marker, so that it isn't just everything we've been saying so far, that it will exchange, that it will endure, that it will forge a certain relationship, a set of mutual obligations, but actually it doesn't just exist as a spoken agreement. You need to have something concrete that identifies this is the covenant. And the rainbow is that, and that's important, okay? So that's a question as well. Richard.
Well, as a retired lawyer, I know that contracts are supposed to be mutual and have things on both sides, but I wonder whether this is a possible contract that is not necessarily two-sided, but just God's, the second side is implied. This is God's statement of, I am done with trying to create the perfect world. This is the world we have. And human beings are flawed, but it's on you to be as unflawed as possible. And that's what I'm leaving you.
Okay, good. I really appreciate that other perspective. I really do, because I think there is, it's so tempting to read Noah's covenant through our experience with Abraham's covenant. But I think there is another way to speak about Noah's covenant, which is that it's very different, and it isn't such an we don't read these laws into it necessarily. That's God is asking for that. But the covenant is really just a way of God saying, okay, I promise I will not harm you. It's, the waiting is lopsided, but it's mostly God's promise. And on that note, I want to highlight, there's something here, this I did mention in the Devar Torah this week, but with whom is Noah's covenant made? I just want to highlight this. Take a look, because Noah, initially it seems God will make a covenant with Noah. Okay, that was our first source. I will establish my covenant with you, itach, singular. But when we get the covenant, I'm going to mekim et briti itchem. I will establish my covenant with you all, and with your offspring, and with literally everything that is alive and breathes. Now, that's interesting, and it suggests maybe a different kind of covenant. What does it mean for God to be in agreement with everything, with everyone? That doesn't sound like a special, unique relationship, which a covenant sometimes feels to us like it is a formalization of a special, unique relationship. And now God's just got a covenant with not just even all humanity, but all living creatures. It's like, okay, so this is like this is very big. And it may mean that it is also very different than the other covenant that we will get to know. Okay, I want to head into that other covenant soon, but let's just see if we can take a few of these last reflections. I saw Suzanne's hand went up right when we were talking about the sign of the covenant. So I'm curious what you're thinking, Suzanne.
Yeah, I'm noticing that a rainbow, it's a sign, but it's very ephemeral. Like it comes and it goes. Some people might actually see it if they happen to be outside at the right time, looking up, having the presence of mind to take it in and discern, oh, that's a rainbow. It's a sign from God. But not everybody is going to see every rainbow all the time, and they come and they go. And I guess you would even have to be daytime to see such a thing. So I'm wondering if it's more of a reminder for God, that it's God's reminder that God has made this covenant with all of the living world.
That's really interesting. Really, really interesting. You know, because a sign, who is the sign for? You know, what is the sign for is sort of what I was asking. But Susanna is asking, who is the sign for? And it is true that a sign is often something that is a marker for someone else to see, right? The first sign, Ot, is the one that Cain has, so that other people will see Cain and realize Cain's untouchable, right? Soon we'll talk about the sign of Abraham's covenant, which is different, the bris, the bris itself. But I'm thinking also about the blood on the door in Egypt as a sign that the God's destructive force would see and therefore not destroy. So is the rainbow a way of saying, like, as Suzanne puts it, God remembering? Oh, and we do use that language of God remembering. So God remembering, and that's why we need a sign. The sign's for us to be like, hey, just remember, you promised to help us out here. Okay, that's certainly one way of thinking it. Though, we will hopefully by the end of our time, we'll consider what that might mean for the sign of the covenant in Abraham's case, which is circumcision. So that's a very different sign, right? And not as visible. Okay, I'm gonna take two more comments and then we're gonna go into Abraham's covenant. One, I see my mother has her hand raised. It's my mother. My mother is signing, so. Very happy to hear everybody's comments, really enjoying that. Love this experience. And then the second thing is, what are those 7 basic laws, those 7 Noachide laws? Good question, good question. I always, like, when I try to list them, I always forget some, but there is a prohibition on murder, theft, eating live animals, idol worship, because it's God, so don't worship another God, sexual crimes and immoralities, a system of courts, and believe the last one is blasphemy. Like cursing God's name. I think that's right. I'm not 100% sure. Someone can check and can correct me. I always forget the 7. But the idea in our tradition is that there are 7 laws that all humanity is required to follow. Now, the other parts of humanity may not have read our Torah, so that maybe they don't care, but that's our way of saying we believe in some universal law. And that's part of the idea here, okay? And my mom is, I think, assuming, as Matt did, that these laws are part of the covenant. Okay, one more comment before we look at Abraham's covenant from Larry. Larry Moss. Oh, Larry, we're not hearing you. You're not unmuted.
How about now? Sorry. I think that one interesting thing to do is to look at actually the Tower of Babel story that you kind of alluded to a few minutes ago, which doesn't come with the covenant, but it comes with a reaction of God to humanity, a negative one. And why isn't that one made a covenant, considered as a covenant as well? I mean, it's kind of a foil story to the story of Noah. And even in the rabbinic tradition, we have the Dor HaMabul and Dor HaMiflaga. So it's also like an important kind of human event that's easy to pass over. And maybe we should be thinking about that at the same time as we think about the Noah story.
Good. And good. Thanks for that, because that mention, because it is, I got a little confused before because I was always like where does Tower of Babel come? Because it seems disconnected from all these other stories. And that is because it is in some ways the break between
it's at the end of this Parsha. Yeah.
What's that?
It's at the end of this Parsha. Yeah.
Correct. Meaning it's a break between the mythic world of Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, Noah. Then there's this flood. And then we get this break of 9 lines of the Tower of Babel story, which imagines a kind of dispersal after there's some, again, humanity is disappointed, but this time the world is not destroyed, but the tower is destroyed, and the people are scattered and given different. It's a kind of etiological, like, how did all the people get across the earth and where all the languages come from? The Tower of Babel. And then right after the Tower of Babel, we take off. And then comes Abraham's story. We begin Abraham's story. Noah is never mentioned again after the Tower of Babel in the Torah. Okay? Never. In fact, right after the Tower of Babel, we start with Noah's son Shem. It's like it literally leaves Noah behind. And then we move on. So that's like whatever the Tower of Babel is, it is a kind of a breaking point that leaves something else behind. And did we leave that covenant behind? Or does that covenant endure forever, as the pshat, the simple reading of the text, seems to suggest? Okay, all right. So let's take a look now at the covenant, the next covenant. We're not going to be able to analyze it in full. We're almost done here. But it is important in our conversation. We think, what is the covenant of Noah? What is the covenant of Noah? Well, all along, we're aware that the covenant of Noah is, well, what is it? A prelude to the covenant of Abraham, a foil for the covenant of Abraham, a lesser, a greater, a more maximal, a more, like how exactly do we think about this? So let's take a look at the covenant of Abraham. And once again, with Abraham, there is a first mention of the covenant, and then there is a fuller speaking out of the covenant. And the first mention of Abraham's covenant, first of all, I will just say this in very quick passing, that there's even another way that covenant is used in the Torah from time to time when people make covenants amongst themselves. So just so we know, the word is, as we have it in our own, in English, it can be used in a less exalted way, just like an agreement between people. But anyway, here comes Abraham's covenant. And Abraham's covenant comes when God says, I am the Eternal who brought you out from Ur to assign this land to you. And Abraham says, rather boldly, Vayomer Adonai Elohim, b'mai da ki irashena. How do I know that I will inherit it? And this may be a call for some kind of sign, right? How do I know? What's my assurance? So there's a huge ceremony here called Brit Ben Abatarim. We end up calling it the covenant between the parts, because Abraham has to cut up all these sacrifices into parts. And then Abraham goes into a trance, a kind of deep sleep fell upon him, and a great dark dread descended upon him. And then we get these really important words that will define in some ways the rest of our journey. Know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will execute judgment on the nation they shall serve, and in the end they shall go free with great wealth. And then at the end, I'm like doing this quickly, but just so we see it, on that day the Eternal forged a covenant with Abraham. And what is the content of that covenant? To your offspring I assign this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the Canaanites, the the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorite, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So, okay, that's part of it, is there's land associated with this covenant. And that was, after all, what Abraham was asking about. How will I know that I'm to possess the land? Okay, so that's very different and much more specific. And then, just because we are running out of time, let me just say this is too quick, but then the last chapter of Parshat Lech Lecha, next week's Parsha, has now the covenant gets mentioned a lot. I will establish my covenant, my covenant, my covenant, an everlasting covenant, an everlasting holding, my covenant, my covenant, my covenant. I'm just asking you to look at the bolded words here of brit, brit, brit. But also there is a sign of the covenant, and the sign of the covenant is circumcision, right? And by the way, by the end, that makes it seem like, immediately raises the question, what, only men carry the sign of the covenant? That seems like a little lopsided, but it seems like it implicates everybody, because it's also, Sarah also gets a new name as part of this covenant, and her offspring is the bearer of the covenant as opposed to Ishmael. So it has to do not just with the sign of the covenant is circumcision, but the nature of the covenant includes land, but also a particular line of inheritance. Okay? Now that's all very different from what we've seen so far. There are some striking parallels. Sign of the covenant here, sign of the covenant here, right? I will establish my covenant with you. I will establish my covenant with you, right? Lots of similarities, but some really stark differences. One is that God is making this covenant with a particular family and a particular line of this family, as opposed to the whole of everything that lives. And the other, of course, is the content of the covenant, which has to do with, you will inherit this land, and your descendants will inherit this land, as opposed to a covenant that is not about any particular destiny, just a refraining from destruction. Okay. All right. So we only have a few minutes left. We did what we had to do, which is spend most of our time on Noah's covenant, which we spend usually less time with. But in these last few minutes, let's hear if there are any voices we haven't heard from yet. Some reflections on what is different about Abraham's covenant. That is a question which really merits more than 5 minutes. But let's just see what we can tee ourselves up for next week's Parsha. So let's start with Kathy Kobayashi.
You didn't turn it off. Oh, yeah. Well, actually, I wanted to kind of get back, although I think it's, relevant here, to the sign of Noah's covenant, because, it's always sort of like, oh, rainbows, really pretty and nice. And like you say, after a storm and that sort of thing. But I've always been struck, and particularly in the reading here, with the fact that it's a bow. It's a rainbow, but it's a bow. And, that's kind of the way it was translated earlier on. So I take it as, and we don't necessarily, at least I don't necessarily think of a bow when I see a rainbow. I think of all the kind of the prettier imagery, but it's a weapon, first of all. And so I think it's kind of interesting that this symbol is, in a sense, a weapon, but it's transformed by being this sign of, in fact, the opposite of violence, like not killing everybody. And so I don't know, there's a kind of an interesting transformation there. And then the other thing that I always, and it's certainly a big image, is bows as hitting targets, and so there's so much about what comes up about missing the mark and hitting the target, and so much the imagery of, the mitzvot and the laws and everything is about missing the mark, and, al-hayd and all of that. And so I just think that it's not just beautiful. I mean, it is beautiful also, but it transforms in a couple of different ways. And how that leads to, circumcision and penises, I'll leave that for somebody.
I'll take that one up. Which is to say, I actually think it does. Weirdly enough, I was just thinking that your comments help in that direction, which is to say, oh right, a keshet is a bow, and I forget which commentator says this, but one of the commentators says that it's a bow turned upwards, as if God is saying, I will not destroy you, I will take the blow, or something like that. I turn my weapon back on myself, which does provide an interesting parallel to circumcision, right? Like us inflicting ourselves in this case for God. And so that does it, in other words, it raises the question, does a covenant not just require an exchange of mutual benefits, but also an agreement to sacrifice, to be even like limited or cut off, so to speak? Those are interesting questions as well. So I will see you then, and I wish you strength and comfort as we move through the experience.